This morning's contemporary reading is A Letter to Noah's Wife by Maya C. Popper. You are never mentioned on Ararat or elsewhere, but I know a woman's hand in salvation when I see it. Lately, I'm torn between despair and ignorance. I'm not a vegetarian, shop plastic, use an air conditioner. Is this what happens before it all goes fluvial? Do the selfish grow self-conscious by the withering begonias? Lately, I worry every black dress will have to be worn to a funeral. New York, a bullion, eroded filigree. Anything but illness, I beg the plagues, but shiny crows or nuclear rain? Not a drop in London, May through June. I bask in the wilt by golden hour light. Lately, only lately, it is late. Tucking our families into the safeties of the past. My children, will they exist by the time it's irreversible? Will they live astonished at the thought of ice not pulled from the mouth of a machine? Which parent will be the one to break the myth? The Arctic wasn't Sisyphus's snowy hill. Noah's wife, I am wringing my hands, not knowing how to know and move forward. Was it you who gathered flowers once the earth had dried? How did you explain the light to all the animals? For wisdom in contemporary poetry, we give thanks.
A reading from the New Testament. Then a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, with 12 stars on her head for a crown. She was pregnant and in labour, crying out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, a huge red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and each of the 7 heads with a crown. Its tail swept a third of the stars from the sky and hurled them down to the earth. The dragon stood before the woman about to deliver, to devour her child the moment she gave birth. The woman gave birth to a male child, a son, who was to rule the world with an iron rod. But the child was snatched straight up to God and God's throne. The woman fled into the desert to a place prepared for her by God, where she would be kept safe for 1,260 days. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and the angels fought against the dragon. The dragon and its angels fought back, but they were defeated and driven out of heaven. The great dragon, the primeval serpent who is called the devil or Satan, who had deceived the whole world, was hurled down to earth, and its angels were banished with it. When the dragon saw that it had been hurled down to the earth, it pursued the woman who gave birth to the male child. The woman was given the 2 wings of the great eagle, so she could fly to the place prepared for her in the desert, where she was looked after for 3.5 years, out of the serpent's reach. So the serpent vomited a river of water from its mouth to sweep the woman away in its current. But the earth came to the woman's rescue by opening its mouth and swallowing the river that the dragon had vomited up. Then the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to wage war with the rest of her offspring, those who keep God's commandments and who hold to the testimony of Jesus. For visions of challenge and comfort, we give thanks.
May the words of my mouth and meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. 2 fabulous readings. What value does that reading, the last reading, the book of Revelation as a whole, have for us, especially in the face of ecological crises? My guess is that most of us haven't spent too much time on the Bible's last book. Some people have, including those looking for a special secret code to life and history, and those who puzzle out different timetables for Christ's second coming. But such interpreters typically have little concern for ecology, and some even welcome signs of environmental apocalypse, which are pretty much present and were reflected in that poem. Faced by the strangeness of John the Divine's visions in this book, we may be tempted to dispense with it altogether. But in my view, that's a mistake, because as this morning's biblical reading illustrates, truth and light can be received in strange ways. This reading is certainly dramatic, with strongly painted features. We have a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars, who's giving birth to a son. We have a majestic, destructive red dragon with several heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads. And we have war in heaven with Michael and his angels. We have the gift of eagle's wings for the woman, and the serpent spewing out a flood of water to carry her away. What incredible stuff! Can you imagine the impact on the first hearers of that story? It is like a dreaming story, isn't it? Native peoples have no difficulty with this. It's only moderns who have difficulty with creative imagery. Today we're used to all kinds, actually, of stories and imagery, and our culture is soaked with it, from Star Wars to video games, which are produced daily through all kinds of media with brilliant technological effects which seek to put over a similar kind of impression. Much of that is simply entertainment, but we also have artists today expressing themselves in similar ways, with multimedia unimaginable to John the Divine, which also tap, however, into today's existential fears and hopes and struggles, because this is what that story is about. It's wrestling with the really deep down stuff that is beyond our minds and the surface. Because the book of Revelation isn't just a curious aberration in the Bible or an ancient relic back there with no parallels today. Rather, it is an expression of deep human imagination and a re-envisaging of our lives and world, a different sort of a world that it seeks to come out of the struggles of the times. And so it sits alongside, for me, literary and artistic genres such as fabulism, science fiction, surrealism, and magic realism. Because whilst we would do well not to approach our lives and world just on those terms, and if you live in that kind of a world and that's all you live in, you're going to go, well, you probably are mad. But without those things, we are impoverished, and we're unable to break free, I think, from the shackles of ordinary human confinements. So this reading contributes at least 3 important elements to our understanding of God and our involvement in today's challenges, especially the ecological challenges. Because firstly, building on what Penny was talking about last week, it encourages us to be imaginative storytellers. In this, we might also point to those contemporary writers who are often mentioned as exponents of magic realism. This is a magic story, isn't it? But it isn't so distant from the whole of reality. It's using magical symbols, as it were, to try and express something deep that you can't get beyond just a little rational discourse. Because magic realism has some resonances with this book of Revelation as a style of literary fiction and art which paints a realistic view of the world but adds magical elements. The English novelist David Lodge put it this way: magic realism, he said, is present when marvellous and impossible events occur in what otherwise seems to be a realistic narrative. And it's an effect you especially see in recent times with contemporary Latin American fiction, beginning with people like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, but also encountered on other continents, for example, in Günter Grass or Salman Rushdie or Milan Kundera. All these writers, said Lodge, have lived through great historical convulsions and wrenching personal upheavals, which they feel cannot be adequately represented in a discourse of just undisturbed realism. And that's what Revelation is about. It's about wrestling with the great historical convulsions of the past, but also offering us and encouraging us to wrestle with them and to express them in all kinds of imaginative story. For how can we speak in the face of ecological crisis? We've seen a couple of Pacific stories trying to help us grasp what's going on and get to grips with this wrenching stuff that's happening. Because reason and good ethical teaching, I think, can only take us so far. We need reimagination and a harnessing of that which is beyond the merely rational. I was struck by this when a local artist approached us here in Pitt Street recently to use this building for some choir rehearsals for a climate change focused artwork that she's been producing. This, she said, is part of the new religion that we need. Well, I said, I'm not so sure about the fact of needing a new religion. Surely we have quite enough religions already, and religions are somewhat ambiguous in what they can offer. But I saw her point, because like many people, this artist has moved away from her Catholic upbringing, but because of that upbringing, she knows the power of symbol and story to move people, either to the right or to the left or in other ways. She contends rightly, in my opinion, that unless we renew symbol and story and spiritual expression, we'll never really transform our interrelationships with the wider environment of which we are a part. Because reason and good ethics are not enough, as we are clearly experiencing at this time in regard to the referendum. As continuing delays to act on such well-aired issues shows, our ecological and other responses remain on the surface if we do not go deeply enough to effect change. So as magic realists and other artists attest, like our Revelation reading, what we need is deeper imagination and deeper empathetic expression. So in terms of embodied action, I think we can see that, for example, also in the gift of the deep greens, who seek to name and relate to our world afresh with creative art, symbol, and spirituality, as well as powerful resistance and new ways of living. Secondly, alongside imaginative storytelling, today's reading challenges us to address our particular context in the light of the supra-rational. And it's hardly alone in this, because amongst its many literary forms and genres, not literal, it's certainly not literary forms and genres, the Bible has many magic realist passages. Commentators, not least Jewish, thus point out to how magic realism flows through the Torah, the first 5 books of the Christian Bible, the heart of the Jewish faith. So in the book of Numbers, for example, quail appears out of the blue when the people need meat. An abused donkey literally speaks out against their owner, and a wooden staff sprouts almonds. And the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, is almost a magic realist book in itself, some elements of which are clearly fictional from a modern perspective, but which still seeks to impart truth through its cultural and religious imagination and profound insights into the meaning of life. Now, strictly speaking, the book of Revelation is in the apocalyptic genre, but it too has vital aspects of imagination to name and reshape our lives and world. So in Revelation chapter 12 that we've heard, the original context was the deep, deep Roman imperial oppression. Symbolically, therefore, the woman who bears the child represents the church, God's redeemed people, adorned with the sun, Christ, and the moon, Moses. And the crown of 12 stars are probably the apostles. The earliest hearers would therefore have identified the dragon, the power of destruction, with Satan embodied in the Roman Empire's fearsomely destructive powers. That's what this story is about originally. But the genius of this story and imaginative symbolism is that it can be applied to other oppressive situations. Indeed, the cosmic elements of the angelic struggle remind us that deep conflicts of existence operate on all levels of being. Think about the voice. It's not about the mind, is it? There's a whole lot of other stuff going on, which is why people are struggling with it, because it involves all the powers and principalities of existence, as the Bible puts it, including the psycho-spiritual elements, as well as reason and good ethics. So as such, this passage can, I think, help name some of our contemporary ecological evils and the way out. Because one of the striking things in Revelation 12 is the role of the earth itself in salvation. For when the serpent does its worst, and the flood threatens to sweep the woman away, and destruction seems complete, and that's how it is for a lot of human beings today, the text in verse 16 is explicit. But the earth came to help the woman. The earth came to help the woman. In other words, it's not simply humanity itself, but God's creation as a whole that can be a key player in history and ecological change. It's almost as if the Bible got to the Gaia hypothesis before it was invented. Now, to find such meaning in Revelation 12, we might be helped by this painting of Ángeles Santos called Un Mundo, or One World. It's an extraordinary piece of work. It was produced by her when she was 17 years old. And it's in Madrid's famous Museo Reina Sofia, literally and rightly alongside ranking with the greatest pictures of Picasso and Salvador Dali. That's the level at which Ángeles Santos, at 17, painted this painting. Like the surrealists and the magic realists and the book of Revelation before them, Santos's Un Mundo speaks into a world which was not listening to reason and which was betraying good ethics with monstrous evils. So like Revelation 12, it speaks of how hope may be found in the planet itself, which you can see here is presented as a very surrealist cube. Think Salvador Dali. And with powerful feminist cosmic features. Indeed, in some ways, its angels complement the more masculine biblical figures of Michael and his army. Because in this painting in Un Mundo, the spiritual defenders are female, with long hair, floating around the earth and lighting it with the moon, the feminine symbol of it, often in the cosmic world. And in the corner too, we see a small group of women with large heads and hairless, and two of them are playing musical instruments, a harp and a flute. And from their different sizes, they're quite probably mothers and daughters. So what Santos is saying is that Earth's healing is related to reimagining our symbols, questioning the symbols and the myths that perpetuate and maintain oppression, and to re-envision not least the vital gifts of women and the maternal, not least the earth itself, for it will be the earth that comes to the aid of humanity. Thirdly, as well as emphasizing imaginative storytelling and the supra-rational, like this painting on Mundo, Revelation 12 is challenging us to shape our lives and world differently. Because the value of this kind of art and revelation, spirituality, is to nurture resistance and hope. It's a commonplace, indeed, to observe that so much of contemporary magical realism is grounded in critiques of colonialism and oppression. Because through such imaginative, even fantastical story and symbol, when you're up against it in Latin America with horrendous violence and authoritarianism, the ordinary world can be relativized and interrogated. Colonialism, capitalism, bourgeois oppressions can be relativized and interrogated. And those things which have been othered, in this case women, or the poor, or the planet itself, can find voice and agency. And that's been part of the book of Revelation's significance, to provide resistance and hope. In the 1st and 2nd centuries, in response to Roman imperialism, later in response to religious oppressions, and in some places in the past and still today, against racism and colonialism. And I wonder, maybe in relation to ecological crisis, that it might not in its own way be a book of extinction rebellion. To draw to a conclusion, in the poem Letter to Noah's Wife, we also heard earlier, Maya C. Popper asks, how are we to find hope and act? Maya relates how, like most of us, she lives with a certain desperation about the climate crisis now manifestly worsening. And she feels so inadequate in her response. And significantly, she sees this problem as related to the need for reworking of symbol and spirituality. It is not enough to issue reports. How many of them have we had? How long do we keep shouting at people to behave properly? We need something more as well. As she puts it, who will be the one to break the myth? The myth of GDP and all the other stuff that maintains the oppression of the earth and the poor. So like Revelation 12, Angeles Santos, and many magic realist voices, Maya's response is to take us a little bit beyond the merely rational and ethical, and points again to the importance of the feminine and the recentering of the hitherto othered. And so the poet asks questions of Noah's wife, of whom so little has been written. What do we know of Noah's wife? Maybe we need to think about her and the other people in the stories of our world that we ignore and have ignored. So in words we might echo, the poet cries out, Noah's wife, I am wringing my hands, not knowing how to know and move forward. Was it you who gathered flowers once the earth had dried? How did you explain the light to the animals? How do we explain the light to all the animals and open ourselves to share in the earth's healing? Let me offer some final thoughts from the great American farmer and eco-prophet Wendell Berry. He writes that one of the texts that seemed to me to be most valuable, he says, comes again from Revelation, from chapter 4, verse 11. You are worthy, O God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you have created all things, and for your pleasure they are and were created. Not for the benefit of the rich, not for the benefit of humanity alone, but for God and God's pleasure. Berry rightly says that this proposes an indispensable standard, namely the sacred, as sovereign over all human power interests, for the stewardship both of things in use and so-called useless things which are set aside. Because like Angelos Santos, the magic realists, and other poets and priests of the imagination, this affirms that what we are told normally is the only possible reality for our world is not the truth. There is always another world if we can imagine it and live it. And so in that angelic light, may we be strengthened in our resistance to ecological and other oppressions, and may we rejoice in the hope of earth and of cosmic healing. Amen.